East Asia, in a vast area, varied both topographically and climatically. Dominated by the huge landmass of China, the region also encompasses the peninsula of Korea and the islands of Japan. China's landscape includes sandy plains, mighty rivers, towering mountains, and fertile farmlands. China's political and cultural boundaries have varied over the millennia, and at times China has expanded to about twice the size of the United States, encompassing Tibet, Xinjiang, Mongolia, Manchuria, and parts of Korea. Today, China boasts the world's largest population and is ethnically diverse. The spoken language varies so much that speakers of different dialects do not understand one another. The written language, however, which employs characters, has made possible a shared Chinese literary, philosophic, and religious tradition. China's first emperor. One of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever made anywhere came to light in 1974 when farmers digging a well in a village near Lingtong in Shaanxi province discovered some broken terracotta sculptures. Chinese excavators soon concluded that they belonged to the immense burial mound of uh, Chen Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of Qin, from when from which China derives. Shi Huangdi brought an end to more than 2 centuries of political and social turmoil by conquering all rival states and uniting an area equal to about half of present day China into an empire he ruled from 221 to 210 BCE. Like many other powerful monarchs throughout history, during his lifetime, China's first emperor began construction of a tomb that would become his home in the eternal afterlife. For its construction, Shi Huangdi conscripted more than 700,000 laborers. His burial mound at Lingtong remains unexcavated, but Chinese archaeologists believe that it contains a vast treasure-filled underground funerary palace believed to match the funerary palace the emperor occupied while alive, or the fabulous palace the emperor occupied while alive. The historian Sima Qiang uh, described both palaces, but scholars did not take his account seriously until the discovery of pits around the tomb containing life-size painted terracotta sculptures of soldiers and horses, as well as bronze horses and chariots. The army of sculptures, which probably numbered 8,000 or more, served as the first emperor's bodyguards, deployed in perpetuity outside his tomb. Today, the Lingtong army consists of about 2,000 statues of cavalry, chariots, archers, lancers, and hand-to-hand fighters. The huge assemblage testifies not only to the power and wealth of Shi Huangdi, but also to a high degree of organization in the Chen imperial workshop. Manufacturing his army of statues requires a veritable army of sculptors and painters, as well as a large number of huge kilns. The first emperor's artisans could have opted to use the same molds over and over again to produce thousands of identical soldiers standing in strict formation. In fact, they did employ the same molds repeatedly for different parts of the statues, but assembled the parts in many different combinations. Consequently, the stances, arm positions, garment folds, equipment, coiffures, and facial features vary, sometimes slightly, sometimes markedly, from statue to statue. Additionally, hand modeling of the cast body parts before firing enabled the sculptures to differentiate the figures even more. The Chen painters undoubtedly added further variations to the appearance of the terracotta army. The result of these efforts was a brilliant balance of uniformity and individuality. The first emperor's tomb exemplifies the grandiose building projects that characterized the many Chinese imperial dynasties to follow. This includes China's Great Wall, which in its original form dates to Shi Huangdi's reign. China has a very long and rich ceramic history, beginning in Neolithic times with the makers of pots in prehistoric villages. The ceramicists of the Majiayao culture of the 3rd millennium BCE, for example, showed a flair for shaping carefully prepared and kneaded clay into diverse, often dramatic and elegantly decorated vessel forms. And until Chinese potters developed true porcelain, extremely fine hard white ceramics, in the 10th century during the Song dynasty. They produced only two types of clay vessels or objects, earthenwares and stonewares. For both types, potters used clay covered by mineral impurities, especially iron compounds ranging from yellow to brownish black. The clay bodies of earthenwares, fired at low temperatures in open pits or simple kilns, remain soft and porous, thus enabling liquids to seep through. Chinese artists often used low fire techniques to produce terracotta sculptures, even life size figures of humans and animals. Over time, Chinese potters developed kilns enabling them to fire their clay vessels at much higher temperatures, more than 2000 Fahrenheit. These elevated temperatures produce stonewares, named for their stone like hardness and density, from the vitrified ceramic. Potters in China excelled at various techniques commonly used to decorate earthenwares and stonewares. Most of these decorative methods depend on changes occurring in the kiln to chemical compounds found in clay as natural impurities. When fired, many compounds change colors dramatically depending on conditions in the kiln. For example, if little oxygen remains in a hot kiln, iron oxide turns either gray or brownish black, whereas an abundance of oxygen produces a reddish hue. Chinese potters also decorated vessels simply by painting their surfaces. In one of the oldest decorative techniques, the potters applied slip, a mixture of clay and water resembling a fine thin mud, by painting, pouring, or dipping, to a clay body not yet fully dry. The natural varieties of clay produced a broad, if not bright, range of colors, as seen in the Neolithic vessels illustrated here, but Chinese potters often added compounds such as iron oxide to the slip to change or intensify the colors. After the vessels had partially dried, the potters could incise lines through the slip down to the clay body to produce designs such as those seen in later Chinese stonewares. Chinese artists also inlaid designs, cutting them into the plain vessel surface and then filling them with slip or soft clay of a contrasting color. These techniques spread throughout East Asia. To produce a hard, glassy surface after firing, potters coated plain or decorated vessels with a glaze, a finely ground mixture of minerals. They often used clear or highly translucent glazes, but opaque, rich colored glazes also became common. Some painters let the thick glazes run down the side of a vase or a figure to produce dramatic effects. Shang bronze casting. Among the finest bronzes of the 2nd millennia BCE are those that Shang artists created using piece molds. The Shang bronze workers began the process by producing a solid clay model of the desired object. When the model dried to a durable hardness, they pressed damp clay around it to form a mold that hardened but remained somewhat flexible. At that point, they carefully cut the mold in pieces, removed the pieces from the model, and baked the pieces in a kiln to form hard earthenware sections. Sculptors then carved the intricate details of the relief decoration into the inner surface of the piece molds. Next, the artists shaved the original model to reduce its size to form a core for the piece mold. Next, reassembled the mold around the model using bronze spacers to preserve a void between the model and the mold. a space equivalent to the layer of wax used in the lost wax method. The Shang bronze casters then added a final clay layer to the outside of everything together, leaving open ducts for pouring molten bronze into the space between the model and the mold, and for venting gases. Once the mold cooled and then broke apart, remove, removing the new bronze vessel and cleaning it and polishing it. Shang bronzes show mastery in casting, rivaling that of any other ancient civilization. The great number of cast bronze vessels strongly suggest well organized workshops. Shang bronzes held wine, water, grain, or meat for sacred rites. Each vessel's shape matched its intended purpose. All are densely covered with abstract and animal motifs. On the vessel illustrated here, a guang shaped like a covered gravy boat and used for pouring wine libations. The multiple designs and the fields of background spirals integrate so closely with the guang's forms that they are not merely an external embellishment but an integral part of the sculptural whole. A horned animal forms the front of the lid, and the rear is a horned head with a bird's beak. Another horned head appears on the handle. On the cylindrical base of the guang is a motif common on Shang bronzes that originated in Neolithic China, a Tao Ti mask consisting of an abstract face with a pair of raised eyes. Various animals, owls, and elephants, for example, as well as more abstract composite creatures, swarm over the surface of the upper part of the guang. The fabulous animal forms, real and imaginary, are not purely decorative. The multitude of shapes suggest metamorphosis and may refer to the ability of the Shang kings and priests to communicate with the worlds of spirits. Archaeologists exploring this region near Chengdu in southwestern China excavated pits that yielded a treasure of elephant tusks and objects in gold, bronze, jade, and clay of types never before discovered. The find attests to an independent kingdom of enormous wealth, contemporaneous with the better known Shang dynasty that flourished at Anyang in northern China. Because these artifacts are markedly different in style and iconography from the contemporaneous Shang artworks, art historians have had to revise their opinions about the character of bronze art in China. The most dramatic find is a bronze statue more than 8 feet tall. Chinese representations on the human figure on this scale are otherwise unknown at this date. This statue matches anything from Anyang and masterful casting technique, very different in subject and style from Shang bronzes. The huge bronze figure initially shocked art historians who had formed their opinion about Bronze Age Chinese aesthetics based solely on Shang material. The figure of unknown identity is highly stylized, with elongated proportions and large staring eyes. It stands on a base composed of 4 legs formed of what are probably stylized elephant heads and trunks. The statue tapers gently as it rises, and the figure gradually becomes rounder. Just below the neck, great arms branch dramatically outward, ending in oversized hands that once held an object, most likely one of the many elephant tusks buried in pit 2 with this bronze statue. Surface decoration of squared spirals and hook-pointed curves are all that link this life-size statue with the small scale and intricate Shang piece mold bronze vessels. Systematic excavations and chance finds will probably produce more surprises in the future and cause art historians to revise once again their opinions about Chinese art in the second half of the second millennium BCE. Chinese jade. The Chinese first used jade, or more precisely nephrite, for artworks and ritual objects in the Neolithic period. Nephrite polished to a more lustrous, slightly buttery finish than jadeite, the stone that Chinese sculptors preferred from the 18th century on, which is quite glassy. Both stones are beautiful and come in colors other than the well known green, and are tough, hard, and heavy. In China, these qualities became metaphors for the fortitude and moral perfection of superior persons. The Chinese also believed that jade possessed magical qualities capable of protecting the dead. In one Han Dynasty tomb, for example, archaeologists discovered the bodies of a prince and princess dressed in suits composed of more than 2,000 jade pieces sewn together with gold wire. Because of its extreme hardness, jade could not be carved with the stone tools used by Neolithic sculptors. Researchers have tried to explain how these artists were able to cut, shape, and incise the nephrite objects found at many Neolithic Chinese sites. The sculptures probably used cords embedded with sand to incise lines into the surface. Sand placed in bamboo tube drills could perforate the hard stone, but the process would have been long and arduous, requiring great patience as well as superior skill. Silk and the Silk Road. Silk is the finest natural fabric ever produced. It comes from the cocoons of caterpillars called silkworms. The manufacture of silk was a well established industry in China by the second millennium BCE, and early examples of painting on silk, for example, the Han silk banner of the Marquis of Dai, have luckily been preserved. The basic procedures probably have not changed much in 4,000 years. Farmers today still raise silkworms from eggs, which they place in trays. The farmers must also grow mulberry trees or purchase mulberry leaves, the silkworm's only food source. Eventually, the silkworms form cocoons out of very fine filaments extruded as liquid from their body. The filaments soon solidify with exposure to air. Before the transformed caterpillars emerge as moths and badly damage the silk, the farmers kill them with steam or high heat. They soften the cocoons in hot water and unwind the filaments onto a reel. The filaments are so fine that workers generally unwind the threads from 5 to 10 cocoons together to bond into a single thread, while the filaments are still soft and sticky. Later, the silk workers twist several strands together to form a thicker yarn and then weave the yarn onto a loom to produce silk cloth. Both the yarn and cloth can be dyed, and the silk fabric can be decorated by weaving threads of different colors together in special patterns, brocades, or by stitching in threads of different colors embroidery. Many Chinese artists paint directly on plain silk. Greatly admired through most of China, Chinese silk and the secrets of its production gradually spread through the ancient world. The Romans knew of silk as early as the 2nd century BCE and treasured it for garments and hangings. Silk came to the Romans along the ancient fabled Silk Road, actually a network of caravan tracks across Central Asia, linking China and the Mediterranean world. The western part between the Mediterranean region and India developed first due largely to the difficult geographic conditions to India's northeast. In Central Asia, the caravans had to skirt the Taklamakan Desert, one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, as well as climb high, dangerous mountain passes. Very few traders traveled the entire distance. Along the way, goods usually passed through the hands of people from many lands, who often only dimly understood the ultimate origins and destinations of what they traded. The Roman passion for silk ultimately led for the modern name for caravan routes, but silk was far from the only product traded along the way. Gold, ivory, gems, glass, lacquer, incense, furs, spices, cottons, linens, exotic animals, and other merchandise precious enough to warrant the risk pass along the Silk Road. Ideas move along these trade routes as well. Many important, perhaps, travelers on the Silk Road brought Buddhism to China from India in the first century CE, opening a significant new chapter in both the history of religion and the history of art in China. Wu Wei Flying Horse. Han sculptors also excelled in bronze casting. One of the many surviving bronze figures of the period, those discovered in 1969 in the tomb of Governor General Zhang, are of special interest. The brick tomb at Wu Wei in Gansu Province contained almost 100 cast bronze sculptures of horses, chariots, and soldiers, a miniature version of life-size army, guarding the tomb of the first Emperor Chen, which appears to have been a model for less magnificent burials elsewhere in China. The figurine illustrated here represents a distinctive breed of horse from Turkestan. It differs from all the others in Zhang's tomb because it is not prancing or standing still but galloping, or miraculously flying because of one hoof rests on a swallow with spread wings. The sculptor posed the horse with its head tilted to one side but presented the animal's body in pure profile. The Wu Wei horse has an even more elegant silhouette with its legs spread widely and its tail lifted behind it like a fifth leg balancing the curved neck and the rear left leg. Zhang's airborne hearse suggested that the journey from his tomb will take him heavenward to an eternal afterlife. Precious gifts to the dead also came to light in 1968 when Chinese archaeologists discovered two rock-cut tombs at Mancheng in Hebei province, about 90 miles southwest of Beijing. Buried in the tombs were Prince Liu Sheng, who died in 113 BCE, and his wife Du Wan. In both tombs, excavators found a treasure trove of early Han Dynasty funerary goods, including two complete burial sites, each consisting of more than 2,000 pieces of jade, fastened by threads of gold. Of higher interest than the costly jade suits is Liu Sheng's bronze incense burner in the form of a sacred mountain. Han Taoists believe that everlasting life could be achieved in the sacred mountains of the Isles of the Immortals in the Eastern Sea. The prince's bronze Boshan has a deep hemispherical bowl and an elegant base decorated with intertwining dragons. The wavy lines of gold inlay on the bowl represent the Eastern Sea. Above rise the jagged peaks of the sacred mountains of Taoist immortals, inhabiting the mountains which project like fingers from the bowl and form the cover of the Boshan. These are reliefs of figures of humans, animals, and birds. Holes pierced in the mountains allowed the smoke emanating from the bowl to escape. The finds in the Mancheng tomb attested both to the immense wealth of the imperial family and to Han artists' mastery of bronze casting. Excavations of Han Dynasty tombs have uncovered some of the finest examples of Chinese stone sculpture. The most important are the pictorial examples of the walls of the Wu family shrines in cemetery at Jiangzhang in Shandong province. The shrines, which all honor Wu men, date between 147 and 168 CE and are simple in form. On the interior surfaces, sculptors carved flat, low polished images that stand out against equally flat, though roughly textured ground. The subjects include legendary and historical events and perhaps also scenes picturing the deceased. Among the historical scenes is a representation of the 3rd century BCE hero Jing Kei's attempt to assassinate the tyrannical first emperor of Qin. On the slab shown, a rubbing taken from the shrine wall. The archer at the upper left is shown to be probably the hero Yi. He saves the earth from scorching by shooting down the 9 extra suns, represented as ravens, in the Fusang tree. The small orbs below the ravens and the sun on the Marquis of Dai's banner probably allude to the same story. The lowest zone shows a procession of umbrella carriages moving to the left. Above, underneath the overhanging eaves of a 2-story mansion, robed men bearing gifts pay homage to a central figure of uncertain identity represented as larger and therefore more important. 2 men kneel before the larger figure. Women occupy the upper story. At the center and facing forward is another figure that the artist singled out as the most important. The identities of the individual figures are unknown. Interpretations vary widely, and in the past decade, scholars have discovered that some of the Wu reliefs have carved inscriptions, leading them to question even the traditional date of the slab. Nevertheless, these scenes of homage and loyalty are consistent with the Confucian ideas of Han society. Although the basic unit of Chinese architecture, the rectangular hall with columns supporting a roof, was common in many ancient civilizations, Chinese buildings have 2 major distinguishing features: the curving silhouettes of their roofs and the method of construction. The Chinese, like other ancient people, used wood to construct their earliest buildings. Although those structures did not survive, the scholars believe that many of these features giving Eastern Asian architecture its distinctive character may date to the Zhou dynasty. Even the simple buildings reproduced in Han stone reliefs and clay models reveal a style and a method of construction long basic to China. The typical Chinese hall has a pitched roof that projects beyond the outer walls. Timber columns, lintels, and brackets provide the support. The walls have no weight-bearing function but serve only as screens, separating inside from outside and room from room. The colors of Chinese buildings, predominantly red, black, yellow, and white, are also distinctive. Chinese wood architecture is primarily multicolored throughout, save for certain parts left in natural colors such as railings made of white marble. The builders usually painted the screen walls and the columns red. Chinese designers often chose dazzling combinations of colors and elaborate patterns for the beams, brackets, eaves, rafters, and ceilings. Artists painted or lacquered the surfaces to protect the timber from rot and wood parasites, as well as to reproduce an arresting aesthetic effect. The drawing reproduced here shows the basic method of Chinese architecture, with the major components of Chinese building labeled. The builders laid beams between columns, decreasing the length of the beams as the structure rose. The beams supported vertical struts, which in turn supported higher beams, and eventually the purlins running the length of the building and carrying the roof's sloping rafters. Unlike the rigid elements of the triangular trussed timber roof, common in the West, which produced flat, sloping roof lines. The varying lengths of Chinese crossbeams and the variously placed purlins can create curved profiles. Early Chinese roofs have flat profiles, but curving rafters later became the norm, not only in China but throughout East Asia. The interlocking clusters of brackets were capable of supporting roofs with broad overhanging eaves, another typical feature of Chinese architecture. Multiplication of the bays, spaces between the columns, could extend the building's length to any dimension desired, although each bay could be no wider or longer than the length of a single tree trunk. The portions of the structural elements could be fixed into modules, allowing for standardization of parts and thus rapid construction. The Chinese wood construction system was so sophisticated that highly skilled workers could fit the parts together without any adhesive substance, such as mortar or glue, and still build very large, stable structures capable of standing for centuries. Zhao Buddha, a gilded bronze statue in San Francisco representing Sakyamuni, the historical Buddha, bears an inscription giving its date at 338. Although some scholars have argued that the inscription is a later addition, most art historians accept the statuette as the earliest precisely datable Chinese image of the Buddha, created during the later Zhou dynasty. The oldest Chinese Buddhist texts describe the Buddha as golden and radiating light. This no doubt accounts for the choice of gilded bronze as the sculptor's medium. In both style and iconography, this early Buddha resembles the prototype conceived and developed at Gandhara. The Chinese figure recalls its presumed South Asian models in the flat relief handling of the robe's heavy concentric folds. The Ushnisha cranial bump on the head and the cross-legged position. So new was the iconography and its meaning, however, that the Chinese sculpture misrepresented the canonical dhyana mudra, or meditation gesture. See Buddhist iconography in the textbook. Here, the Buddha clasps his hands across his stomach. In South Asian art, for example, the Buddha turns his palms upward, with thumbs barely touching the front of his torso. Secular arts also flourished under the six dynasties, as rulers sought calligraphers and painters to lend prestige to their courts. The most famous early Chinese painter with whom extant works can be associated is Gu Kaizi. Gu was a friend of important members of the Eastern Zhen dynasty and won renown as a calligrapher, a painter of court portraits, and a pioneer of landscape painting. A hand scroll attributed to Gu in the 11th century is not by his hand, but it exemplifies the key element of his art. Called Admonitions of the Instructress to the Court Ladies, the horizontal scroll contains painted scenes and accompanying explanatory texts. The 7 illustrated stories all recount historical examples of wifely virtue. Like all Chinese hand scrolls, this one was unrolled and read from right to left, with only a small section exposed for viewing at one time. The section illustrated here records a virtuous act of heroism, Lady Feng saving her emperor's life by placing herself between her husband and a bear that had escaped from a circus. Lady Feng's courage and selflessness in risking her own life to save the emperor were perfect models of Confucian behavior. As in many early Chinese paintings, the artist set the figures against a blank background with only minimal setting for the scene, although in other works Gu provided landscape settings for his narratives. The figures possess poses and fluttering drapery ribbons convey a clear expression of animation in concert with the individualized facial expressions. This style accords well with painting ideals expressed in texts of the time when representing inner vitality and spirit took precedence over reproducing surface appearances. Meeting of two Buddhas. A gilded bronze statue shows how the sculptors of Northern Wei dynasty transformed the Gandhara derived style of the Buddhist art in China. Dated 518, this piece was probably a private devotional object in a domestic setting or a votive offering in a temple. It represents the meeting of Shakyamuni Buddha at the viewer's right and Prabhupada, the Ratna, the Buddha who had achieved nirvana in the remote past. As recounted in the Lotus Sutra, an encyclopedic collection of Buddhist thought and poetry. When Shakyamuni was preaching on Vulture Peak, Prabhudaratna's stupa miraculously appeared in the sky. Shakyamuni opened it and revealed Prabhudaratna himself, who had promised to be present whenever the Lotus Sutra was preached. They sat beside each other and continued to expound the Lotus Sutra teachings. The meaning of the two Buddhas symbolized the continuity of Buddhists throughout the ages. Behind each Buddha is a mandorla, flame-like almond-shaped nimbus. Both figures sit in the Lalitsana pose, one leg folded and the other hanging down. This standard pose, which indicates relaxation, underscores the ease of communication between the two Buddhas. Their bodies have prolonged portions, and their smiling faces have sharp noses and almond-shaped eyes. The folds of the garments drop like a waterfall from the shoulders to their knees and spill over the pedestal, where they form sharp ridges resembling the teeth of a saw. The rhythmic sweep and linear elegance of the folds recalls the brushwork of contemporary Chinese painting. Sorry for the pronunciation of that one, guys. Seated Buddha, Yungang. The colossal seated Buddha, one of the Longmen caves, is the most famous rock-cut image of the Buddha in China, but the Tang sculpture has impressive predecessors elsewhere. The best early example, datable to the northwestern Wei dynasty, is in Cave 20 of the Yungang Grottos near Datong. Until 494, the dynasty's capital in Shaanxi province west of Beijing. Emperor Wangcheng followed the advice of a monk named Tan Yao, ordering the cutting of 53 Buddhist cave temples into a mile-long stretch of sandstone cliffs at Yungang to atone for his grandfather's suppression of Buddhism. The facade of the cave 20 collapsed long ago. Worshippers would not have seen the 45-foot-tall seated Buddha until they entered the temple. The Buddha, with distinctive Ushnisha and exceptionally long ears. The Buddha sits cross-legged with his hands forming the Dhyana Mudra. The models for this and other rock-cut Buddhas of Yungang were in India, from which China also imported Buddhism. The Buddha's legs are only summarily carved, but he has fully modeled broad shoulders and massive arms. He wears a monk's robe, as in earlier South Asian statues, but the Northern Way sculptures depicted the folds of his garment in very low relief. They are little more than incised lines in the figure's arms and torso. The naturalism and sensuality of Indian Buddha statues are lacking here, replaced by simple, massive forms designed to overwhelm the visitor. The simplification is appropriate for figures seen in a dimly lit cave. One of the two bodhisattvas that originally flanked the Buddha, only one remains. The bodhisattva to the Buddha's right crumbled when the cave's facade disintegrated. Sui altarpiece. One of the preserved Sui masterpieces is a small altarpiece with an incense burner, now in Boston, dated by inscription to 593, dedicated by 8 mothers, another example of the significant role that Chinese women played as art patrons. The cast bronze altarpiece was displayed in a Buddhist shrine, probably in Xi'an. The central figure is Amitabha, the Buddha of the Western Pure Land, seated with crossed legs on a jeweled lotus throne, with his right hand raised in the Abhaya, Fear Not mudra, and a flame halo framing his head. Flanking him are 2 famous bodhisattvas. At the left, Bodhisattva Dashiji, who clasps his hands as prayer, and Bodhisattva Guanyin, who holds a pomegranate. Behind them are 4 other disciples. The setting in Amitabha, Pure Land Paradise, which the Sui sculpture conjured by placing the Buddha and his followers beneath a lush canopy of tall trees with jewels in the leaves and chime and pearl ropes hanging from the branches. The elegant proportions of the figures and the gentle smiles on the faces imbue the group with a special charm. Below, 2 figures holding the thunderbolts and 2 seated lion guards the entrance to the Western Paradise. Vairocana Buddha. In its first century, the new dynasty continued to support Buddhism and to sponsor great monuments for Buddhist worshippers. One of the most spectacular Tang Buddhist sculptures is carved into the face of a cliff in the Longmen Cave complex, first developed by the Northern Wei dynasty. The colossal relief, which dominates the entire site, features a central figure of Buddha, 44 foot tall, seated. An inscription records that the project was completed in 676 when Guozong was the Tang emperor, and that in 672 the Empress Wu Zetian underwrote a substantial proportion of the considerable cost with her private funds. Wu Zetian was an exceptional woman by any standard, and when Gaozong died in 683, she declared herself emperor and ruled until 705, and when she was forced to abdicate at 82. Wu Zetian's Buddha is the Vairocana Buddha, not the historical Buddha portrayed in earlier Chinese artworks, but the Mahayana cosmic Buddha, the Buddha of boundless space and time. Flanking him are 2 of his monks, attendant bodhisattvas, and guardian figures, all smaller than the Buddha, but still of gigantic size. The sculptor represented the Buddha in serene majesty, an almost geometric regularity of contour and smoothness of planes, emphasizing the volume of the massive figure. The folds of his robes fall in a few concentric arcs. The artist suppressed surface detail in the interest of simplicity and dignity. Nanshan Temple. The Tang rulers embellished their empire with extravagant structures colorfully painted and of colossal size, furnished with items of great luxury and elaborate gold, silver, and bronze ornaments. Unfortunately, because most Chinese buildings were constructed of wood, few Tang buildings survived. A notable exception is the Nanchang Temple on Mount Wutai in Shaanxi Province, the oldest extant Buddhist temple in China. It lacks the costly embellishment of the imperial structures in the royal in the capital, but its main hall features a tiled roof with a curved profile and an early example of a kind of roof that in boulder fashion became the norm in later Chinese architecture. Curved eaves were not present in the buildings depicted in the Wu family shrines or in the Han Dynasty houses. Dunhuang Grottos. The westward expansion of the Tang Empire increased the importance of Dunhuang, the westernmost gateway to China on the Silk Road. Dunhuang long had been a wealthy cosmopolitan trade center, a Buddhist pilgrimage destination, and home to thriving communities of Buddhist monks and nuns of varied ethnicity, as well as to adherents of other religions. In the course of several centuries, beginning under the Six Dynasties, the Chinese cut hundreds of sanctuaries into soft rock of the cliffs near Dunhuang, known today as the Mogao Grottos and in the antiquity as the Caves of 1,000 Buddhas. The Dunhuang Cave temples are best known for their mural paintings, but they also contain sculpted images of painted unfired clay and stucco and painted silk scrolls. The earliest recorded dedication of a cave at Dunhuang was 366, but the oldest extant caves date to the early 5th century. The Dunhuang grottos are especially important because in 845 the Emperor Wuzong instituted a major persecution, destroying 4,600 Buddhist temples and 40,000 shrines, forcing the nearly 260,500 monks and nuns to lay down their lives. Wuzong policies did not affect Dunhuang, then under Tibetan rule, so the site preserves much of the type of art lost elsewhere. Paradise of Amitabha in Dawang Cave 172 shows us how the splendor of the Tang era and the religious teachings should come together in a powerful image. Buddhist Pure Land sects, especially those centered on Amitabha, the Buddha of the West, had captured the popular imagination under the Six Dynasties and continued to flourish during the Tang Dynasty. Pure Land teachings asserted that individuals had no hope of attaining enlightenment through their own power because of the waning of the Buddha's law. Instead, they could obtain rebirth in a realm free from spiritual corruption simply through faith in Amitabha's promise of salvation. Richly detailed, brilliantly colored pictures steeped in the opulence of the Tang Dynasty, such as this one, greatly aided worshippers in gaining faith by visualizing the wonders of the Pure Land paradise. Amitabha sits in the center of a raised platform against a backdrop of ornate buildings characteristic of the Tang era. The Buddhist principal bodhisattvas and lesser divine attendants surrounded them. Before them, a celestial dance takes place. Bodhisattvas had strong appeal in East Asia as compassionate beings ready to achieve Buddhahood but dedicated to humanity's salvation. Some received direct worship and became the main subjects of sculptures and paintings. Bodhisattva Guanyin, Danwang. The Danwang grottos are justly famous for their mural painting, which are precious documents of the Tang's large-scale painting at a time when evidence from elsewhere in China is lacking due to the destruction of Buddhist art from Emperor Wuzong's persecutions in 848. Archaeologists also have discovered paintings on silk in the Buddhist caves of Danwang. Perhaps the finest examples dating to the end of the Tang dynasty is a silk hanging scroll found in 907 in Wall 17. Dedicated by a woman, it depicts the Bodhisattva Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of boundless compassion, guiding the donor's soul to the Pure Land paradise of the West. Guanyin is a larger-than-life, bejeweled figure clothed in multiple layers of elegant robes, scarves, and shawls, the folds of which cascade down his body and spill onto the ground in a flurry of delicate ink lines. A nimbus frames his crowned head, and he has a thin mustache and a tiny beard on his chin, the favorite style of the Tang imperial court at the time. In his right hand, this regal bodhisattva holds a burning censer, and in his left hand, a lotus blossom and fluttering temple banner. Guanyin gazes in the direction of the richly dressed but demure lady with bowed head, whose soul he will guide to the western Pure Land, here depicted as a celestial Tang palace, floating in the clouds at the upper left of the scroll. Yan Li Bin. Although few examples of Tang painting exist today, many art historians regard the early Tang dynasty as the golden age of Chinese figure painting. In perfect accords with the contemporaneous and later Chinese poets and critics' glowing descriptions of Tang painting style are the unrestored portions of the 13 Emperors, a masterpiece of line drawing and colored washes attributed to Yan Li Bin, born in an aristocratic family and the son of a famous artist. Yan was prime minister under the Emperor Gaozong, as well as a celebrated painter. This hand scroll depicts 13 Chinese rulers from the Han to the Sui dynasties. Its purpose was to portray these historical figures as exemplars of moral and political virtue, in keeping with the Confucian ideal of learning from the past. Each emperor stands or sits in an undefined space. The emperor's greater size relative to his attendants immediately establishes his superior stature. Simply shading in the faces and the robes gives the figures an added semblance of volume and presence. In detail, in figure 1619 is represented Emperor Xuan of the Emperor Shan of the Shen dynasties, seated amongst his descendants, two of whom carry the ceremonial fans that signify his rank and also serve to focus the viewer's attention on him. Xuan stands out from the others because of his dark robes. His majestic serenity contrasts with his attendants' animated poses, which vary sharply from figure to figure, lending vitality to the composition. Tomb of Yang Tai. The wall paintings in the tomb of the Thai princess, or of the Tang princess Young Tai at Qianjian, outside ancient Chang'an, near the Lingtong burial mound of the first emperor, enable art historians to analyze court painting style, unobscured by problems of authenticity and reconstruction. When she was 17 years old, young Tai was either murdered or forced to commit suicide by Wu Zetian, sponsor of the colossal rock-cut tomb of the Vairocana Buddha at Laoyang. Young Tai's underground tomb dates to 706. However, because of her formal burial, had to await Wu Zetian's death. Adorning the walls of the main chamber of Yang Tai's tomb are paintings of palace ladies and their attendants, images of pleasant court life to accompany the princess into her afterlife. The figures appear as if on a shallow stage, but the artist did not provide any indications of background or setting. The attendants, arranged in 2 rows behind the ladies whom they serve, assume a variety of poses, some seen full face, other in 3/4 view, from both the front and the back. The compositional device of pairing figures facing in and out of the picture space appears often in paintings of this period and effectively conveys depth. Thick, even contour lines describe full volumed faces and suggest solid forms beneath the drapery, all with the utmost economy. The simplicity of form and line, along with the measure rhythm of the poses, enhances the dignity of the represented. Tang ceramic sculpture. Tang ceramicists also achieved renown and produced thousands of earthenware figures of people, domesticated animals, and fantastic creatures for burials inside tombs. These statues attest to the demand for ceramic sculpture by a much wider group of patrons than before. But terracotta funerary sculpture has a long history in China. The most spectacular example is the ceramic army of the first emperor of Qin. The subjects of the Tang figurines are also much more diverse than in earlier periods. The depiction of a broad range of foreigners, including Central Asian musicians on camels, accurately reflects cosmopolitanism of Tang China and the robust exchange of goods and ideas along the Silk Road. The artist painted some of the figures with colored slips and decorated others, such as the spirited, handsomely adorned neighing horse, illustrated here with colorful glazes that run in dramatic streams down the object horse's sides when fired. The popularity of the horse as a subject of Chinese art reflects the importance the emperors placed on the quality of their stables. The breed represented here is powerful in build. Its beautifully arched neck terminates in small, elegant head. Richly harnessed and saddled, this horse testifies to its rider's nobility. Li Qing. For many art historians, the Song era is a golden age of Chinese landscape painting, which first emerged as a major artistic genre under the Six Dynasties. An early northern songmaster was Li Qing, the son and grandson of government officials who were also distinguished scholars. Li too became a scholar, but he is best remembered as a pioneer of landscape painting. A solitary temple amid clearing peaks is perhaps his finest work in this hanging scroll. Li placed a temple, bridges, and wine shops in the foreground and middle ground, seen against the dramatic backdrop of a towering mountain and cascading streams. Although the setting is rustic, Li imposed a firm compositional order upon the built and natural environment, with the main solitary temple on the central axis. Nonetheless, the sketchy application of diluted ink to the silky scroll creates a dreamlike atmosphere. Li had developed followers and imitators and exerted a major influence on the later development of Chinese landscape painting. Fan Quan. Although Li Qing and many other Song painters worked for the imperial court, Fan Quan, who was a Taoist recluse who shunned the cosmopolitan life of being long, was a Taoist recluse who shunned the cosmopolitan life of being long. He believed that nature was better as a teacher than other artists, and he spent a long time in the mountains studying configurations of rocks and trees and the effects of sunlight and moonlight on natural forms. Just as centuries later, Giorgio Vasari would credit Italian artists with the exploration and perfection of naturalism, so did song critics Laud Fawn and his contemporaries as the first masters of the recordings of light, shade, distance, and texture, several centuries earlier than in Europe. Yet the comparison with the 15th and 16th century Italy is misleading. Chinese landscape painters did not aim to produce portraits of specific places seen from a fixed viewpoint. They did not seek to imitate or reproduce nature. Rather, they sought to capture the essence of nature in its remarkably vast spaces using brush and ink on silk. Their paintings are not representations of unique rock or tree formations, but spiritual communications with nature, perfect complements to Taoist philosophy and the quest for enlightenment. In Travelers Among the Mountains and the Streams, Fan, following Li's example, painted a vertical landscape of massive mountains rising from the province, but in Fan's mountainscape, painted in Hanshan and Shaanxi province, there are few buildings and they are hard to find. The overwhelming natural forms dwarf those temples, and the few human and animal figures, which the artist reduced to miniature proportions, are visible. The nearly 7-foot silk hanging scroll cannot contain nature's grandeur, and the landscape continues in all directions beyond its borders. Fan showed some elements from level ground, for example, the great boulder in the foreground, another obliquely from the top. The shifting perspectives direct viewers' eyes on vicarious journeys through the mountains. To appreciate the painted landscape fully, observers must focus not only on the larger composition, but also on intricate details and on the character of each brushstroke. Numerous textures help model massive forms and convey a sense of tactile surfaces. For the face of the mountains, for example, Fan employed small, pale brushstrokes, the kind of texture that Chinese call raindrop strokes.